And as we move the show forward, and we're going to continue to move the show forward, if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe, hit that bell. If you're watching somewhere else, go ahead and share it so whoever's following you can follow us. Because next we are bringing on, very honored to bring on, Mariah Parker, who is an Athens County Commissioner, co-host of the podcast Waiting on Reparations, a cultural worker, an organizer, a PhD student, an all-around fantastic person. Mariah, thank you so much for being back with us here on the Freedom Side.
It is a pleasure to be back.
Well, the pleasure is all ours. I mean, there's so many things that we could say, so many places we could start, but maybe just sort of picking up a little bit on where we have been going. I wanted to get your thoughts, Mariah, on this cop who killed Rayshard Brooks, just getting his job back, being reinstated, essentially on a technicality, it seems.
Yeah, so the Civil Service Board of the City of Atlanta found that his termination went against their policies with regards to human personnel matters, that they were supposed to have given him 14 days. And he was fired immediately because he murdered a guy on the job. And so on those grounds, he was reinstated this week, though it is important to know two things, I feel. The conditions of his bond make it so that he's not allowed to possess a firearm, he can't be around other officers, so he can't actually go back to work. So this man, thankfully, is not back on the streets. However, his reinstatement does mean that he is receiving back pay for the time that he was away from the force. He is now on administrative leave, which means he is being paid. He's getting a paid vacation to return to the force, as well as receiving all of his benefits back. And so, as much as knowing that he's not reinstated to like working the streets of the city of Atlanta does bring some relief, the fact that, he is being paid handsomely to, take a vacation while being, actively being charged with murder right now. And so it comes as a great disappointment and sadness to the activists who have fought for justice for Rayshard, to the family of Rayshard Brooks. And it comes as a slap in the face as well, knowing that today Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms released their city budget for fiscal year 2022, which includes a 10% increase to the police budget, wow, including salary increases for police officers, bringing the city up budget, I believe, up to the city budget for policing up to $267 million. And so, they out here killing people, and yet they're being rewarded for their work with increases to their salary and an inflation of their already exorbitant budget. So it's just indicative of the work that we have to do in Democrat-controlled cities like these. People want to say, "Oh, this is what happens in Trump's America." Like, nah, man, this is what happens in America. Period. And we're seeing, and as y'all have brought light to in y'all's work, like it's also a global issue. Right. We're living under a police state globally. And so we do have our work cut out for us in changing the paradigm here in Georgia.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I almost thought it was a joke. I don't know why I thought that. Not that these things don't happen all the time when I saw it. I mean, but hearing about the budget, I mean, it's almost like insult to injury, Mariah. That, I mean, it's one thing to change nothing, but you look at all these places. I think D.C. also, they tried to increase the budget for the police to some degree. I think maybe, I don't know, a few other places it was the same thing. I mean, it would be bad enough if you just did nothing, but it's like, well, not only are we not going to listen to you and defund the police, not only are we not going to just stand pat on these giant billions of dollars we already spent, we're actually going to spend more money on policing, and somehow that is presented as like a reform because they always claim, oh, we're going to change all these things.
They need training.
We're going to hire better cops. We're going to retain the good ones by paying them more. We're going to incentivize people from the city to work in our police department so they're patrolling our own communities. Well, we've tried this and it has not worked. And we do have a mountain and tomes and tomes of expertise writing around, the benefits of trying something new. We've theorized on it. We've tried it in places and implemented solutions that look different and work different and worked better. And yet we're still not learning from the mountains of expertise that movement workers have brought to this conversation.
I mean, well, you mentioned how this like policing is so global, and it's true. I mean, we're going to talk about Colombia in a little bit, but I mean, so many police forces around the world are also trained by the US, and they're trained in the same tactics. And that's really frightening to think about, because like the US also trains, you know, it's also the funding is so amazing too, because I think, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but that something like the LAPD has a bigger budget than some countries' militaries.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the same goes for the NYPD, or basically, I'm sure the Atlanta PD. I think it's probably a constant in these big cities across the country. But the fact that I don't think people realize like how much of the budget in cities or in states is going towards policing. In some cases, it's like over 50% of the budget. And you mentioned democratic cities. Like, yeah, most of the cities in the US are run by Democratic mayors. And the same problem persists. It's not a party issue. And you have, you know, Joe Biden, his administration is talking about giving police more funding.
To investigate themselves when they kill us.
Yeah. Right.
Great. Thank you.
Right. It's right. It's incredible. So go ahead, Eugene.
Well, no, it is incredible. Just something you said just sparks how I was thinking about Rania. I mean, I'm actually curious, Mariah, like in Athens, what the police presence is like, because it's big cities, but it's also these small towns. Like I'm from Charlottesville, Virginia, another southern college town, and you know the thing that always sticks with me is like when you graduated from Dare. They took you to this, like, I don't know, they had like a party for you or whatever in the park near the high school because you graduated from Dare in 9th grade. And I remember so vividly going to it, and they had a helicopter, and then they had many other weapons, but one was like a Barrett 50 cal. If you don't know rifles, it's an anti-material rifle. It's basically a giant 50 caliber rifle designed to stop big trucks by putting a bullet in the engine block. And they were like, if you do good in school, you too can shoot this giant thing. And they had these armored vehicles there. And I don't know, I've lived there all my life. I just felt like, what do they have any of this for? I'm not sure anything happened. I wonder if it's a similar situation there in Athens.
It is. Even for a town of 140,000 people, we have a tank. We've got drones. We've got all kinds of weapons of war that are at the ready to quell the unrest that comes with underinvesting in communities when the people rise up and they say they're not going to take it anymore. And so I represent one of the quote unquote most dangerous parts of Athens, Georgia, and it is the most policed. You know, if you go 5 miles down the road to the wealthier areas, you don't see there's no cops in sight because they have the most resources. And yet the most under-resourced communities are those that are most heavily policed. And yet we still have problems with organized crime. We have problems with just loitering, just homelessness, basic things that happen when you don't give people the money they need to survive. And I also want to get back to what you were saying about like the global nature of the militarization of the police and the occupation of our communities, because even in communities like mine, we had 6 police shootings in 2019. Wow. Surprisingly, none during the pandemic last year. And so people want to say like, oh, well, we don't have those problems here. Like people aren't getting killed by the cops here. Like, why would we defund the police? But it's like, they all receive the same training from the same national, international agencies. Right. There's this global network and ideology around the way that policing is to be undertaken in our communities. And so even if it isn't happening right now, it is only a matter of time. And we are seeing, tragedies happen in smaller cities like Elizabeth City, North Carolina, Kenosha, Wisconsin. So like drawing that attention back to the way that these networks of information and power kind of flow through these training networks, through these training regimes, and ultimately, are embedded in the ideology of policing. It's not something you can escape just because you are a small town or you haven't had a police shooting recently. Ultimately, they are geared up for that use of force at any point in time. And it could, you never know when your city could be the next one, even if it's not one where regularly we hear stories of police brutality, because maybe those stories aren't getting told also.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I don't know, Juan. I don't know if I heard you there trying to jump in or not.
No, yeah, I completely agree. And even like you were saying, the tanks, the guns that they're receiving, it's like, what are they preparing themselves for, right? Like that's what it feels like. That's like the big question. Is like, what are they preparing themselves for? We see like the growing inequality in the system, and they're arming up for something, and it's like, in these small towns, like they're not arming up to fight ISIS, or maybe they're getting ready for Red Dawn. But like at the end of the day, it's to kill like everyday working class people. When people have had it, whenever that twig snaps, they're gonna be armed. They're already armed. They're already training. You know, they're doing cross training with Colombia. They're doing cross training with Israel. They're geared up. They're doing these tactical trainings in small towns and in big cities. And at the end of the day, who is it for if it's not for us?
You know, talking about the worldwide implications of many things.
Rania, you muted.
Oh, Rania's talking, so I can't see you. So if you're muted,
you guys, what is my? I really am so bad at technology.
What is?
I gotta stop muting. Well, I had to mute myself because there was noise. Anyways, okay. So now that I'm back, not muted, what I wanted to say is to what Juan's point was. You're saying, what are they preparing for? I think it's really important for people to understand that, like, I think there's this belief in America because of the way the media portrays it that police brutality obviously disproportionately impacts Black people. But it's not only, police don't exist just to police Black people in America. Like you mentioned, working class people. Like there are poor white people who are also brutalized and attacked by police because their communities just aren't rich. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, you're not safe, is my point. Is like, it's not like there's people who are completely immune as inequality grows, the existence of police, right? The existence as the rich get richer. The police exist to protect their property and their wealth from the rest of us. And that, of course, is very racialized, but that doesn't mean that just because you're not Black, you're like safe from this policing apparatus. And it's wrong to believe that. And I think people need to recognize it as not just something that's a threat to only Black communities. It threatens Black communities the most, but it's a threat to all of us who aren't a part of that elite group of people who the police actually work for.
Yeah, people treat, why aren't there protests when a white person gets killed as some sort of great
protest,
gotcha.
Y'all.
But let me know where to be with the pots and pans and the sign. Let's get it, because this is also an injustice. And I think that the global uprising against police brutality that we saw last summer, and that we're really seeing a reinvigoration of right now, was fostered by exacerbated conditions of economic anxiety and social anxiety. And so in Black communities where, we are being brutalized and we're also being subject to these economic conditions that are untenable, it's no wonder that we are rising up for our people, because we just can't take it anymore. Whereas I cannot necessarily say the same for white communities and middle class communities. That may be a reason why we don't see people rising up when other races are brutalized by the police to the degree that we regularly see it happen in communities of color.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I hate to make a hard pivot here, but I will make a hard pivot here.
I do want to.
There is actually another issue I want to.
I do want to mention one thing.
Please go ahead.
When we were in Minnesota, we also saw white families that came out too, that were talking about like they were victims of police brutality. So the thing is that it's not like a thing that doesn't exist. But the narrative needs to be something, right? Like the narrative needs to be like oh, it's only Black communities, because then they could be sold to like people in like white people in the suburbs. It could be sold to folks that already have like racist notions, right? And they could be like, oh, then what were they doing? Why is it this? Why isn't this community? Why don't you protest when somebody is killed in your community by somebody else in your community? Like that is a thing that needs to be packaged and sold. Because if you go on the news, when the people that are killed by the police that are not people of color, it barely gets covered. And also when it does get covered, it's not like it's being covered for our community, but it's being covered for people to be scared. Oh, this is why we need more police. Right? This person that was killed by the police isn't a victim, but is somebody who's big and scary, right? Mike Brown is scary. Trayvon Martin is scary. They find people's records. They find people's pictures with hoodies. They find whatever it is to sell this package to then sell fear.
Yeah.
So then when more money is being put into policing instead of education, there's no question about it.
Right. That's what it's about. It's about being able to justify that money. And the one way that you do that is to convince people that it's only going to hurt Black people, but it's really good for you. But actually, it's bad for everyone when all that money is getting diverted to policing. It's the worst for Black people, but like, that's definitely a media narrative that's framed in a very specific way, like what Juan was saying, to justify spending this insane, like over 50% of your budget on police, so that when people call 911 because their family member is having a mental health crisis, the police show up. Like, the police show up. Or somebody's like having like any kind of medical crisis, the police show up. As opposed to the people.
It's amazing to me that the only time that it's bad to take a picture with a gun is if you've been killed by police. Anytime someone's been killed by police and there's any picture of them anywhere with a gun, it's like, oh, well, they got a picture with a gun. You got this congresswoman from Colorado walking around like she's Annie Oakley out here, and no one seems to care. But somehow, if you have a gun in a photo on Facebook, then you must be an evil person.
If you're Black with a gun on Facebook.
Lo and Bear.
But Black people aren't allowed to own guns and still be good.
Well, they
people,
aren't.
apparently.
The first gun control laws, but let's talk about it. In Reconstruction, the Black Panthers, people don't want to bring that up. But let's be honest, the roots of gun control are to disarm the Black community. That's the roots of it. It's gone beyond that. But I think that's an important understanding of how we have criminalize the ownership of guns in a way that allows racists to own guns. I mean, this whole, listen, there's so much misinformation here. The most people who own guns are not hunters. That's just false, but it's presented that way in the propaganda. The average person who owns a gun is like a middle-class white dad living in the suburbs who's afraid of getting robbed by some Black guy who's got his gun in his shoebox, and then his kid finds it and shoots his other friend in the head.
Why is he afraid though?
That's the average gun owner right there, and it's in the NRA. Their entire politics are based on creating that kind of mentality, but under the guise of it being quote-unquote sportsmen and this, that, and the third.
You actually just reminded me of this. I know you wanted to pivot, but I have to mention this because of what you're talking about. Your ground law got George Zimmerman off for murder on Martin. There was a Black man named John McNeil. I covered this back in 2012. He was in Cobb County, Georgia, and he shot and killed a man who was like trying to attack him on his property, like in his yard. And he was a gun owner in Georgia. Lots of people own guns. And he shot the guy, and he was actually charged for murder. And stand your ground didn't work for him because he was a Black gun owner. So yeah, even when the law is written to actually benefit the gun owner, and the NRA didn't say a word about his case, by the way. The NRA was like nowhere to be seen. Whereas George Zimmerman literally like hunted down a Black child and shot him fought him and shot him. He attacked him and shot him. And of course got away with it for reasons we're all well aware of.
I mean, the same thing happened to Marissa Alexander.
Yep.
In Florida, I believe, right?
Yeah.
And she didn't even shoot anybody. Like she shot at the ceiling because
That's right.
her like abusive partner was like threatening to attack her, and she went to jail. Like
she
these laws
was only released because of a massive outcry. And worth noting that this guy told the newspaper that he was abusing her. He told the local newspaper, he said, I'll never forget this. I got 5 baby mamas and I put hands on all of them. And she was in jail. And that was his quote to the newspaper about his activity. Well,
America.
if it's all right with you, please go ahead.
No.
America.
Yeah. Damn. Yeah.
Yeah. What else can you say at that one? Unbelievable. It was the St. Petersburg Times, I think. So to make a hard pivot, I don't know if it is a hard pivot at this point, since I've said I was going to do it 8 times. But something that I think has also been majorly in the news, rightfully so this week, is the issue of vaccines, the vaccine waiver at the World Trade Organization, the U.S. changing its position, and really just how all of that is couched in many ways, but certainly in the context of the new Cold War. Something that your retweet made me aware of, Mariah, was a tweet by Jamal Bowman. I can't see this. Maybe we're bringing it up. Maybe we're
Give me
not.
1 second, I'll pull it.
But this tweet by Jamal Bowman, where he was sort of pushing back on this idea of like everything being centered around competition against China, as opposed to, you know, like saving the world with vaccines. And I mean, it was so, I mean, both in Biden's speech, you know, in front of Congress, and the way the vaccines are portrayed. I mean, it's almost like, Mariah, if you want to promote something positive in America, you have to do it in a way that it's like, but China is bad, and this is why we must do it.
So it's up right now.
Yeah. So it's like y'all want to show like y'all better than communism, like then like provide for the people globally. Provide for everyone. Like, it's so simple. And I really am concerned about how, particularly some of Biden's rhetoric around competing with China to be the winners of the 21st century, I think he said in his recent address, like is stoking a lot of the anti-Asian, or has the potential to stoke a lot of the anti-Asian violence that we were just bore the brunt of here in Atlanta a couple of weeks ago. The loss of, 8 folks in the rash of spa shootings. And so this idea that we have to dominate China, we have to show them who's boss. We can't be weak in front of them. Like, what do you think? What do you think the white supremacists are going to do with that?
Right.
Bruh. Like, and so it comes back to the fact that both sides are very, very much culpable for stoking the hatred that then is being taken out on people who live here, not even to mention the impacts with our imperial presence abroad. But yeah, y'all want to show China who's boss? Let's get vaccines to every person. Period. Like, I don't know what, like, if y'all really want to play that game, let's play.
I think it's interesting. China really has started to play the kind of role that the Soviet Union once played for the US, which is everything good or bad that is being put forth as a policy at this moment, including good policies like infrastructure plans, the vaccinations, is being framed as this is how we get China, you guys. Like, I'm like waiting for the moment when we start hearing that we need to give universal health care a chance because China. Yeah, like that's where we're at. Like every policy, whether it's we need to raise the Pentagon budget or we need the state to cover preschool costs, is like because China.
Yeah, I mean, China's become like Cobra Commander in G.I. Joe.
Yeah.
But it kind of plays like in a way, you've got this growing inequality. I, of course, don't think we're in like a New Deal era kind of moment. I don't see Democrats actually going that far. But it's almost like it shows you the value that there is in some sort of multipolar world, in that if the U.S. does feel like it needs to throw some like more crumbs at its population, then it kind of like lessens the austerity a little bit in an effort to compete with a rising China or a rising whatever, and it used to be the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had all these benefits and welfare policies, and you had to compete with that. And in order to do that, like, you had to throw bigger crumbs at people, or there'd be like some sort of workers uprising.
Yeah, I think it's, it's an important point on so many levels, really. I mean, it just feels to me that it was also important to see a congressperson say something about it. Whatever I think about any one person in Congress, I'm pretty sure Jamal Bowman is actually the first person I've seen in Congress, literally the first person I've seen in Congress in the past year that has in any way, shape, or form questioned whether or not we should be moving into this new Cold War mentality. And that to me is also very scary. And this was similar to the first Cold War, like you have this lockstep conversation here where even people who may know it's not right, they don't necessarily want to say anything, because then it's sort of like, well, what are you trying to say? What are you doing? Are you a traitor? Are you this? Are you that? And sort of the official enemy politics, Mariah, is such a huge history, certainly such a huge history of black radicals being smeared, that it just felt to me like, okay, finally, thankfully, somebody in Congress was willing to say something about this, because I'm sure there's so many people who are questioning it, but feel, well, if I say it, what are people going to think about me?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and then my wondering is, like, does the left like accept that framing of competition with other global powers as a way for us to expand the social safety net here? Like we were joking about like, oh, universal pre-K so we can catch up with China, but like, is that an acceptable trade-off of like rhetoric for actual like material gains for working people? I don't know. I feel like it feels a little gross, but like,
oh, of course. No, it's awful. It promotes war, and or at least it both justifies this new policy while also justifying raising the Pentagon budget. So it actually contradicts itself.
You could cancel my rent. If it's for China, you cancel
he's like,
cancel my rent.
Cancel my student debt.
School free for China, healthcare, China.
The student debt, student debt, all of it.
But that's not
all debt.
That's not what's happening. Like that's not what's happening. It's not a trade-off. No. It's not a trade-off. We're getting nothing. We're getting racism. We're getting like more money put into military budgets. We're getting more policing. We're like the only reason people are talking about the struggle of working class people right now is because of COVID. It's not because of the real inequality of the system. It's because there was a year where the flaws of capitalism have been exposed to a greater extent, and now they have to do something about it. If it wasn't for that, then Biden's speech would have only been about China. It would have only been about the competition with China. And it's because people are suffering to a greater extent right now that any of these things are happening. And I that can be like loose, right? Because we don't live in that alternate timeline where COVID didn't happen. But how long has Biden been in politics? 40 something years? When has he introduced any of the progressive policies that he's now toting?
Yeah.
Well, he's done the opposite. He's actually done the exact opposite of introduced those progressive policies. He's tried to take down the only decent policies we've had. He's talked about defunding Social Security. He freaking says he wrote the crime bill. He's like, I wrote the damn bill. Like, and he's proud of it, right? Like,
I wrote the bill.
I wrote the damn bill.
Mentioning COVID, this is a real hard pivot, but I don't want to go off air without just ripping these people. I don't know if you all have seen this, but Kroger is closing stores all across America in cities that are passing these ordinances to raise the minimum wage, for essential workers. Like Long Beach was the first one. I think maybe it was a bonus or something. They called it hero pay. I think LA is another one. And they just start closing grocery stores, profitable grocery stores, because they refuse to pay people. And it's just like all of the rhetoric about essential workers and we're going to clap for people and we love them and so on and so forth. Then localities say, yes, we do appreciate these people. We appreciate them so much, we're going to change the laws to increase their wages, to show them appreciation. And then the companies that employ them are like, whoa. Increase their wages. Well, we're not going to do that. We're just going to close the store. It's unbelievable. Long Beach and LA, I think it's 2 to 3 stores. It's the most callous thing I think I've seen in the past 3 months.
It's crazy.
Yeah. That's how little
It is.
Sorry, Mariah, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no, I was going to say, so that's what's known as the Capitol strike. Am I correct? Like when Capitol was like, nah, be out. Ha! Yeah. So like, how do we fight back against that? Like, what are you supposed to do in that situation when because I represent a food desert. Like I'm imagining like how the community come together and organize against a Capitol strike of that nature. Like it's really insidious that they have that power. Like, oh, you need diapers? Well, we had to pay our workers $2 extra an hour, and now we close. So you're welcome. Like that, it's just really insane to me. It's really insane to me, and something I think that as we win gains for working people around, issue of wages, something that we're gonna have to be prepared to organize against.
Yeah, I agree with you. And insidious is the word. I mean, it's just, what was the meeting? I mean, you just think like there was no one in the meeting in the Kroger corporate headquarters. Like, I don't know, y'all. Like, this just doesn't look good. I mean, who is working there? I mean, we know what they're working there. We know it's the profit motive. We know it's the nature of capitalism. But it just seems like it's hard to really fathom that a group of people really got around and were like, okay, you know what we need to do? We need to fire hundreds of essential workers because we won't pay them for more dollars. I mean, we could go on and on. Just to ensure
our corporate overlords still get billions.
If only they knew that if they would just pay their workers those $4 more, we could win against China.
Tell them that.
None of y'all called the CEO and told them?
Yeah.
Oh,
No,
man.
gonna call these people up.
I could have
I
avoided this
want to
whole
go.
thing.
I want to go back to something though. You
Please.
said, is Jamal Bowman really the only member of the squad that's like openly spoken against escalation of this new Cold War?
I believe he's the only member of Congress. I mean, I could be
Yeah.
wrong, but I
That's-
follow Congress pretty closely.
What is-
I don't think I've seen. I could be wrong. Now, if you count the primary, the Democratic primary, you know, Bernie Sanders, who's in the Senate, said something tepidly about that a couple times. And I think one or two other people, you know, they made some paean to cooperation. So if you count them, but in terms of people who are just in Congress, I mean, I'm really racking my brain. I cannot remember one other congressperson that has said anything of this nature. Now, I could be wrong, but I actually don't think I am wrong. I think that really he stands alone.
So what is the point of like electing these people to Congress, these progressive Democrats to Congress, if they don't actually do anything about the biggest problem that we have at the moment, which is an escalation with China? It's like threatens the world to have an escalation with China. Like, what is the point? I don't understand.
I feel like the average voter just isn't that informed about foreign policy issues.
Yeah.
That we are escalating a Cold War with China is not something that people
but
are
the
thinking
squad
about.
members should. The squad
Oh,
members
they
should be.
certainly, yes.
Like, this is what's
But, like,
justifying
people end up
raising
being there without having to address that because people are thinking
Yeah.
about bread and butter kitchen table shit.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I want to
Please.
go back to
Keep going back. We're going back.
We're gonna keep on going back.
Way
Go back.
back.
Keep on going back.
No, but the conversation about food deserts and like even like these like corporations striking, I think a big part of that is that we got to realize that we can't be dependent on corporations to feed us, right? Like we can't be dependent on even like this capitalist system to feed us. That's why like the organizations like Cooperation Jackson, like the work that they do with like in food deserts, right? The black farmers in Detroit, the black urban farmers in Detroit that are creating like a food social network, like that is the work that is necessary. And it's crazy that we have an entire system that throws out a crazy amount of food on a regular basis. During the pandemic, we saw food being thrown out, like dairy farmers literally pouring tanks down into the soil, right? And that's food that can be given to like poor and working class people that were suffering during this time, right? The pantry lines were around the block, and still are today, right? But the thing is that the organization is in the hands of the capitalists. The system isn't organized, right? Like the only people that are organized are Amazon, you know, FedEx, UPS. But instead of having organization of how we can get these food surplus that exists, again, before the COVID pandemic, there was food being thrown out then. What is it? Something like 50% or 60% of food gets thrown out either when you calculate the food that doesn't make it to the actual grocery store and the food that actually gets thrown out, right? Like, the majority of food gets thrown out, but there's people that are hungry. It's the same thing with housing, the housing issue. There's in New York, these high rises are empty, and they were empty before the pandemic. There's high rises in Midtown with 85% vacancy, 65% vacancy. Meanwhile, you step out where we're filming right now, and there's homeless people up and down the block, and they've been homeless for how long? The pandemic didn't make them homeless. Mm-hmm. And the crisis of capitalism is capitalism itself.
Period.